Good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us. For those of you who have not been here before, I'm Craig Hess. I'm the Director of Corporate and International Training here at SAIT, lead up the group that's responsible for working with individuals, corporations, other nations in terms of helping them upskill and reskill their workforce. And Jenny, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jenny Gilbert, as you can see from my title, and I work with Craig's team as a leadership development specialist, and I also facilitate for SAIT as well. So you find me half-time with Craig's team and half-time in a classroom somewhere, and that can vary a lot as well.
Perfect. So Jenny, why don't you kick us off with our land recognition, and then we can get into a conversation about confidence.
I will do that. So again, good morning, welcome. If it's your first time joining us, and a special welcome. And if you're returning, also a special welcome. We'll have a special Friday welcome for everybody today. Those of you who aren't familiar, this is our main campus in Calgary. And well over 100 years ago, before the first cornerstone of this building was laid, before Dr. J.C. Miller dreamed of even having an applied institute on the hill in Calgary, and long before the Calgary Stampede was even created, this land was the hunting grounds of the three tribes of the Blackfoot Nation, the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Siksika. What we call Calgary today was known as Macintyus and Elbow, the place where two great rivers meet. And the Blackfoot shared the land of the Blackfoot was shared by the Beaver people of the Tsuut'ina and the Nakota people of the Stoney Nations, as well as the Northwest Métis homeland. So every time we join here, it is important to us to recognize the Blackfoot Confederacy, the care of the land, and all those who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. Spoken with confidence on a morning in which I know confidence is going to carry you a long way, as you're not quite feeling 100% with us today, but that's okay. We will get through. So speaking of confidence, today is all talking about team confidence. I am sure by the time we get through the next 15 minutes or so, when a word starts to lose meaning and you only think about the sound of the word and it gets stuck in your head. I forget what that is called. It was in a Ted Lasso episode. The word confidence is going to start to sound funny to us, but let's start there. What's confidence? What's confidence and why is it important?
So, okay, let's start with individual confidence. I know we're going to talk about team confidence, but we have to understand individual confidence. And really, self-confidence is part of our self-belief. And there's two parts that make up our self-belief. So we have self-esteem or self-regard, some people call it, and self-confidence. And those two together make up self-belief. So if I had a lovely whiteboard here, I'd draw you a picture of a tree, and your self-esteem are the roots of your tree. And then your self-confidence is like the bloom of the tree. So everybody has both. But that self-esteem, self-regard piece, that's what feeds your self-confidence. So if you like yourself, if you're happy with you, then you're a big full tree. And if not so much, then you're a bit of a little sapling. So some of us start and we're perhaps not rooted in a great place. And that might affect our self-esteem and our self-confidence. So both go together. We have to, when we're looking individually, it's a lot to do with how we see ourselves. And that impacts our confidence. And then the other part that we have to take on board is that confidence will always waver. Nobody has a steady confidence through the day. We might look at people and say, oh, they're so confident all the time. But all of our confidence wavers. But if you have a really healthy root to your tree, when you waver, that low point is not too low. If you start lower down, that low part can be really low and can really knock you off your step. So that's the individual confidence piece, self-esteem plus self-confidence. And then when we get into the team piece, team confidence, now we're talking about collective belief. And so that brings in a whole sort of different dynamic because we're talking about people, obviously more than one person.
Okay. So when you think about that, then I like that, I like the approach of self-esteem, self-regard equaling self-belief. What are the components then of team Can you make a similar analogy? Right?
I think
Can you build it out that way? Like how does a team, like what are those components?
Yeah.
Am I making this? Why am I making this a longer question than it needs to be?
I think you can. I think the piece is like we immediately, because I used a tree, maybe you think of a forest. And the key part in here is that team confidence is not necessarily the sum of individual confidence. And we do this a lot. Like when we talk about resilience, we say, oh, my team is so resilient. I've got lots of individual people who are resilient. Well, just because individually we're resilient doesn't mean that our team resilience is good. And so it's the same with confidence. Just because I might have a great self-confidence and you do, and 5 other members of our team do, that doesn't mean that our team confidence is. And I think when we look at team, and I'm not sure the posh words around it, but there's different kinds of confidence. Like we have an efficacy confidence, and that would be, are we confident in the job that we do? And then we have an outcome confidence. Can we get to where we want to go to? And so I haven't narrowed it down nicely for you, but I think there's a lot going on. And I think the other thing that we should sort of mention right off the start here is that this is important when your team is interdependent on each other. We're actually talking about a team and not a group. Because if you just have a group of people that individually have to do their thing, you probably don't need that team confidence quite so much.
Yeah, no, that's a really, yeah. So when you think about where I go to on this one is there's an obvious sports analogy here that you can make, right? And, you know, you've been very active in sports and your kids are very active in sports. And, you know, when, especially in team sports, when a team gets on a roll, right? And you can tell those teams just carry that confidence and that swagger, and you know, everything seems to be easier, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't happen by accident, and that's the piece that we need to pay attention to, is that it's intentional. And so, if we're talking about sports, if you're coaching or leading that team, every single member has to believe in each other. So the first step is, do you believe in yourself? And then the second step is, do you believe in the people around you? Because the minute, when we talk about interdependence in a team sport, we're hugely interdependent on each other. But if I don't trust you, or I don't have belief in you and your skills and your abilities, I'm going to pass you the ball. I'm going to look to do something else. Well, that might not be the best way to go. And the minute we start to get those breakdowns, that's when you start to see it coming down as well. And so I think it's constant work and constant building of that collective belief.
Yeah, and to your point, it doesn't happen by accident, right? So when we think about some of the great teams of all time, and it's where I want to try and transition this from, because I think it'd be so easy just to lean into sport in this conversation, but we're not all, you know, we're not the Oilers dynasty of the 80s. I'm sorry, I had to go there early. And yes, please let the 8-1 comments start to flow in the chat now. It was only game 1. But, you know, these teams put in a ton of work behind the scenes every day to create their skill, to create their ability, to know how each of them is going to be able to rely on each other, to know what their role is in that team, and to stick to doing their job versus trying to do someone else's job. Darnell Nurse.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you take that from the world of sport and start to now think about whatever your team at work may be, whether you're leading a team of project managers or whether you're leading a group of instructional designers, or whether you're leading a sales organization? How do you lift, you know, excellence in that team dynamic in sport and find the parallels in the corporate setting?
So I think in essence, we're still looking at performance. Yeah. So, you know, when we hold a job, when we work for a company, we're looking for that performance. And the first question is, what is that performance? Like, are we all crystal clear on where we're going? And that is a really easy sentence for me to say. And it's really, really hard for people to put into practice. I mean, you can, try with your team, have everybody sit down and write down what the top 3 priorities are, or what the main goal is. And if everybody around the table is identical, you have to celebrate that, because that's so rare that we're all on board. And we often think that everybody's got it, but they don't necessarily have it, because if you're not talking about it, they're definitely not thinking about it. And so where are you going to is got to be the first one. What is that performance? Where do we want to get to? And then looking at, what is it that we need in order to be able to perform? And so it is going to depend on the team, but some are going to need specialist roles. And so building that belief and that credibility in those specialist roles, you said it yourself, that role clarity is really, really key, but you can't perform a role under pressure if you don't have role acceptance as well. And so what we need everybody to have is role clarity and role acceptance. But the minute that we talk about a team, we also have to have that for each other. And so teams move through, we always talk about it linear, I can't say that word, linear, in a straight line.
Linearly?
Thank you, there you go.
There you go.
It's one of those days.
See, I got your back.
Thank you. And we go forming, storming, norming, and performing, but it doesn't happen like that. But one of the classic conflict moments for teams is a lack of role clarity. So as a leader, what are you doing to help your team understand who's who, what's the role? Do the people on your team accept the role that they have? And do we accept each other's roles? And that's all in conversation most of the time.
Yeah. And I wonder how many, and I think it probably falls, again, not to belabor the sport analogy, and I'll try to get off it right away, but I think you talk about that more in a sport team, because you're in so many more situational events, right? Hockey teams can have their face-off specialists, et cetera, et cetera. How many organizations do you really sit there as a team and talk about, role? So that, I think there's 2 things we need to think about here. Individual ability on the team, right? So just because your job description or title says your role is one thing, doesn't mean you may not have a specific set of skills. And now I'm sounding like Liam Neeson here in Taken. But right. So how do you leverage how, when you're constructing your team, do you think about those roles, but then think about the skill sets that eventually leaders should see emerging on their team, and thinking, oh, John here is actually really good at this. How do we work as a team to leverage that? But I just don't think that necessarily happens that much.
Yeah. What if it did?
At least that's my perception.
Yes. But what if it did? What if we saw it as a performance for where we needed to go to? And you brought up a really good point too. Like, if we're going to talk about confidence, our confidence soars or increases when we do things that we know we're good at, when we have those strengths. And our legacy in leadership, our legacy in work teams is don't look for the strengths. The legacies look for the weaknesses. We dress it up beautifully and we say, oh, this is an opportunity for you. But really, we're saying you're not very good at this and you need to get better. Yeah. And what if we started to look at those strengths, because our roles shift, with the constant transformation and the constant pivots that we take, and we redesign ourselves quite often. And so that would be an excellent conversation to have. And most leaders hold some kind of one-on-one. And, check in, what are those strengths? What lights your fire whilst you're working? And some leaders I come across, they get a little bit nervous to ask that question, because if you ask me and I say, oh, my strengths are this, this, and this, and you're like, oh, I don't know about that, and you see 3 different strengths, well, actually, rather than worry about it, let's just celebrate. Now we've got 6 strengths. Because if I see my strength here, I'm going to enjoy doing that. Can we put those 2 together? And that will lift the contribution that I can make to the team. And as they start to sort of shift a little bit, then we need to talk about that as a team. So we're all seeing those roles and how they work.
Yeah, it's that yes and. But I think the key thing in there too is if somebody comes to you and says, I really enjoy doing ABC,
Mhm.
even if you don't think they're necessarily great at ABC, if it's still accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, why wouldn't you lean into that?
Yes.
Right? Because ultimately people you want to work somewhere that has meaning, you want to enjoy what you're doing, and you want to have fun doing it. Right? Does that mean you get to do that 8 hours a day every day? Probably not. But I think even Marcus Buckingham talks about the fact that you don't, when we lean into strengths, you don't have to build jobs around your strength only every minute of every day. It's, do you have the opportunity to engage in those activities?
Yeah, I think it's 20%. I think it's just 20% that you need in a day to have that, whatever the magic number is for engagement and satisfaction. I'm pretty sure that's where he got to in his research. Yeah, I think that's important. And I think that it's a conversation that we don't have often enough. And the other part too, you mentioned you do it and it's not brilliant, or it's good enough. Well, what a phenomenal opportunity to offer that person some growth. They love it and they like doing it. So can we develop them, whether that's through mentoring or training or education or whatever that might be, so that they can get better at it? They'll want to engage in that growth. Mastery is part of intrinsic motivation. So as they get better, that's going to feed their confidence as well. And for you as a leader, what a great window for recognition. So it Absolutely. It's building. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think it's in one of the Gallup polls that they use, there's the question in there is, do you get to use your strengths at work? Or something to that effect? Do you get to do what you're best at every day at work? Right. And it's not about, again, doing it all day. It's whether you actually get to do that. So to your point, I think it's a really important conversation. And one to also, I think, to tie back into this team confidence piece, how do you, would you jump into that at your next team meeting? Everybody run out of here and at your next team meeting, sit around the room and say, okay, what of each of you think your strengths are? Or do you, I guess I think I know where you're going to go, but go ahead.
Yeah, and you could, yes. If it's not a conversation that you've ever had before, I might start more on a one-on-one basis and start to check in. Are we actually aligned on where our strengths are? It's an interesting one, because when we lack confidence, we see that in different cues. Nobody really comes and says, oh, I'm really down on my confidence. Sometimes they might. And so if you're going to start somewhere, I'd actually start by, just take some time and watch and listen to your team. How do they show up? What does that look like? And you can hear self-doubt in the way that people speak. And you can see self-doubt, hear it really, I suppose, in body language as well. Yeah. And I think that might be a good place to start to sort of reinforce in there. And the other thing I think we have to sort of touch in on is, if you have somebody who is supremely confident on your team, what are you doing with them? Because that can be toxic. It really can.
Yeah. So a couple directions I think we could go from here. Let's come back to the overly confident individual. I think there's times and places for it, right? An overly confident individual can help pick up the team at times too, but let's just put that to the side for a second. When we think about so basically the question that has come up here is, what are some of the tactical things that we can do to ensure we continually reinforce team confidence?
So as a leader, there's lots of ways that we can build it. I think that the continual reinforcement is, what does performance look like? Like, what are we trying to get to? Can't say that enough. Be crystal clear on what the goal is and how we're going to get there. I think helping people to develop is really important. That conversation that we just had around strengths and what do they enjoy doing. I think as a leader, the biggest way that you can actually help to build confidence is make yourself available. Like you are a support person for your team, and support is really different than direction. And support is a slightly different conversation, but what are you recognizing? How are you helping, and how are you supporting? I can't remember the research in detail. I think it came from Mind Gym, but when teams set stretch goals and sort of really, they seem almost impossible, the members of the team will engage in that stretch goal, providing they have support from their leader. If they don't feel that they have that support, they will back off really, really quickly. And so it's sort of a combination of all of those that continually build that self-confidence. And of course, results build self-confidence too for some people. And this is the other part that we're dealing with here. It's very individual. Some people's confidence absolutely hangs on the results, whereas others not so much. Maybe it's a validation of how they got there. And in today's environments as well, we also have to look at what are we doing when it doesn't work? What's the conversation that we're having when it doesn't work? And we gaily throw around terms like fail fast and fail forwards and all the rest, but I think that's an important conversation to think about too, because if we switch it to learning, then that won't damage confidence.
Yeah, so maybe let's lean into that a little bit around when things aren't working, when results aren't coming in like expected or as planned, and you can tell you got a team that is down. Like, to your point, like you talked about individuals' confidence wavering. Yeah. Team confidence obviously is going to go through the same thing at times, right? So how do you, where do you start when confidence is down collectively amongst the team? And so how do you start to reinforce and rebuild?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to step into that control sphere. So what does each and every person have control over? And what will we do next? So, and this is a really good thing, it's easy to talk about confidence when everything's great. But part of team confidence is collectively we believe that even if adversity strikes, like we turn around the corner and there's another pandemic or something like that, do we collectively believe that we will withstand adversity as well? And so it's bringing everybody together again, and maybe it's a little bit of a reset, but where's the control? And what steps do we have control over? When we go into a slump or into a crisis or into adversity, the danger is that we will expend a lot of energy on things that we have no control over. So we want that control piece. The second one, I think these are all going to end up being C's, but connection. Is your team actually connected? And we talk lots, I've talked lots about social capital and FICA and building those relationships. If you've been doing that continuously, you probably already have that in place. That's a much stronger foundation. But if your team are just sort of moving and colliding and they call collaboration reading an email, then that you'll be lacking that connection. That connection is where we really know each other on the team. And then once you've got that, then you can lean that in towards confidence. And I think that the care piece in there is, where can you get the recognition and the validation and start to lift that again?
Oh, there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I guess the other couple of things that come to mind with this is that there's a couple of comments, questions that folks have put forward here around, team building activities. What other sort of team activities that can help with team dynamics, team confidence, team strengths, thoughts on those in terms of how they play in here. And then I have a follow-up question, but don't let me forget it. I'm trying very hard not to give you all my questions all at once like I normally do.
Team building is such a funny thing because I think we've moved beyond let's go get lost in the forest and build a bridge and all get across the bridge. And yet some teams love that, and it's absolutely the best thing they can do. So know your team, know your people. Everybody will have different budgets. If you don't have a budget for team building, then it is literally building that connection is what I think. And you can do that in so many ways. You don't even have to go off site. You can do that within your meetings. And you'll smile when I say this, but our meetings at work are often just a case of we do what we've always done because that's the rhythm that we're in. So if you want to build your team, change the rhythm, do something completely different, hand it over to someone else, change up what's coming. If you have a budget for team building, I think the key is, what do you want from that? What does your team need from that? And you absolutely need to involve your team in the conversation. Just because you might think that, or something, you can go throw knives or something now, can't you? And it's called team building. Like, just because you think that would be really fun, we might not be interested in that. So,
one hopes you're throwing knives at something other than your teammates, but
I think you do, yeah. And actually, just cool. I don't often see it, but Joni Lee popped something in the chat there, breaking bread. Yes. And sometimes it's as simple as, if you are working face to face and you're all together, like, go for coffee, even if you can't afford to go for lunch together, or bring lunch in. And there's some really good work from Alex Pentland in Europe. They banned coffee cups at desks, because they wanted everybody to take coffee together. Oh. And so they made the time, and it was, I forget the industry, it was in a place where you could all take a break together, and teams would do that, and they would go hang out, and they build connection, and the effects on the bottom line was staggering in that study. But it's all about building that cohesion, and that cohesion is sort of the sticky stuff that holds us when we need it.
Yeah, really good. How would you look at this with respect to remote teams? Right, we're in that remote hybrid world, probably will be forever now. Right, where does that play, and how do you, as a leader, how do you check in on or build that team confidence remotely?
Yes. So it's a different cadence when you're working virtually. So that point that we've sort of said, I think 2 or 3 times now, where are you going? Like, what are the goals? What's the guardrails that we're between? What's the pathway that we're taking? That has to be repeated more often, because our ability to go off track is much, much greater when we're not in close proximity. Now, how you do that is, you can do it in all sorts of different ways, whether it's in a team meeting or whether it's via Teams, like, it's a statement or whatever. And then I don't think it's too much different, but I think you have to look at the way, how are you bringing your people together? And so if we're having a team meeting on Zoom or on Teams and everybody has their camera off, well, it doesn't matter how much you try and convince yourself. If the cameras are off, people are reading their email on their side, or, it's unlikely you've got that full engagement. Now, there's a lot of research to say we don't need cameras on all the time. I'm right with you. But when do you need them on? When do you need to connect with each other? And there are so many good things that you can do. Like, we learned so much during the pandemic. So you can still build social capital online. You can still build your team, build the validation, build the growth, have those conversations. You're just working at a different cadence and a different medium. And I think as a leader, it's the awareness of it. It's really easy to shut down a bit more, I think, when you're virtual.
Yeah, no, and it's more work, right? For a leader, it is more work, and it probably the team dynamic, I think, obviously looks and feels a little bit different than the team that's together physically all the time. But it doesn't mean it's either right or wrong. It is just simply different.
Yeah.
In a prior life, I ran a 300-person sales organization that was coast to coast. You saw each other 3 times a year, right? And so very, very different piece. So a couple of things I wanted to come back to, and I remembered to remind myself about my question. You didn't, but those moments when your team dynamic is down and you're starting to focus on perhaps what you can control, focus on the process, etc. One thing I have always struggled with in my career is, focusing on celebrating. Basically comes down to impatience, right? You still want the result. You want to generate the result. You want to get to where you need to get to. But I always struggled with, how do you continue to celebrate or celebrate the wins in the process, the wins in the things that you can control, versus putting the goal out of the mind temporarily, and always thinking that, if you're focused on celebrating the process, does it diminish ultimately where you still need to get to, if that makes any sense?
It does. I think when we're goal orientated, so when you're after the goal, when you're after the number, that can be all consuming. And we have to remember that performance leads to the number. You will always get a result, and your people need you in their performance. And so, when we talk about celebration's a curious word, because people, it doesn't have to be rah, rah, rah and cake. It is simply, what went well for you this week? Let them tell you. And when you hear that and you hear their words, there will be something to build on from there. And then maybe the second question is, what did you learn this week? Oh, fantastic. How are you going to build that in to next week? And the aim is continuous. There's that support, is we're lifting up that performance and moving it forwards. The aim is to elevate, to help. And the danger is, if we do nothing, we're not at the goal. And we do nothing because it's safer just to say nothing. And that actually extinguishes a lot of good behavior, because there's no validation to it. There's no recognition. And it's important to know your team. Like, I'm definitely not suggesting that we give a ribbon for doing your day job. And many people need that. They just need to know they're on the right path. How often do they need it? I'm one of those people. Like, every now and then I need to know I got it right. I need someone to tell me that I got it right. And I'm okay, good. And you can just leave me alone for ages. But others need that more frequently. And that's where it comes down to know your team and what they need.
Yeah. You know what? I think it's probably that phrase that you just used there about, a ribbon for doing your day job.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really, I guess that's probably what I've always struggled with, thinking about this piece here.
Mm-hmm.
So folks, thank you for enjoying the last 3 minutes of the Craig therapy session. But let's get back to the overly confident person. So there's a couple personality traits, I think, within here I would like to look at with respect to the confidence. So you've got the overly confident lone wolf person. And then you probably likely have on any team the folks who are just fine doing what they're doing. You know what? I'm here. I've got a couple of years left. I don't want to invest in personal development, right? You want to build the team, go ahead, build the team. I will just be here. So let's kind of take a look at those two branches of the tree, tying it back to your earlier tree comment. So the overly confident person.
Okay, so let's go the first one. When you've got somebody that's overly confident, or two people, and it can be toxic, and it can be toxic to the extent that if other people make suggestions, team conversation, and those suggestions get put down, or there's body language, it's as simple as an eye roll, that suggests that wasn't a great comment. We call them non-productive responses. As a leader, you have to keep an eye out for them, because if you tolerate that, that is going to destroy team confidence. And what it causes is the rest of the team backs off, and now you've only got that person or those two persons like doing, I don't want to say doing the work, the others will still do the work, but you've lost that cohesion, you've lost that connectedness. So as a leader, that is your role. And sometimes it's a difficult conversation, but it's pointing out the impact of what they've done. Now, in the belief that most people are good people, one way that we can often turn that quite quickly is lean towards some kind of mentoring system. But that has to be set up really well, because if there's no chemistry, mentoring doesn't work. Like, mentoring is a generosity and it's giving. And so you're asking one team member to give to help somebody else. Both have got to buy into that before it can even start, let alone be successful.
So agree with it all. The couple other twists on this is, one, what if that overly confident person is your top producer? And two, what if that overly confident person is the actual leader and you're somebody on that team?
Okay, so if they're your top producer, there's a beautiful little clip from Simon Sinek on this. You have to be careful. Like, if they are damaging the rest of the team, there's a decision to be made there.
Yep. Because
yes, they're your top performer, and what is happening to the rest down here? Like, I mean,
they would be the Jamie Tart of your team. Sorry, you can't talk about leadership and not talk about Ted Lasso, right? So,
I still haven't seen it.
Apple is coming to get you.
I don't have Apple TV. So I really, you've got to take, if you have that top performer and they're toxic, you've got to have the conversations. Like, that's ruining the rest of your team.
Yeah.
And I think that's within your accountability.
Couldn't agree more. I think one of the best things you can do in that situation is, to your point, have the conversation, provide the coaching, and if it's not moving the needle, you move the person.
Yeah.
For me, it's that simple. Like, results can't trump everything, right? So let's go the other direction. The individual, the individual who's just happy to be there, doesn't want to really dig in, probably isn't bringing down team confidence, but isn't doing anything to help build it up, isn't interested in developing themselves.
I think if they're contributing, I think if it's not doing damage, and if they're contributing, and let people be. Like, sometimes that's what we need. And we need the people who just want to do their job, so that as we investigate, we constantly talk about these experiments and, trying things out and that's not for everybody. And we still need those jobs to be done. And I don't think you would destroy or even diminish team confidence by just quietly getting on with it. I think the really important thing that we often forget is don't just leave that person as if that's what they always are. Like, we all go through these waves in our lives, don't we? And sometimes we just, all we can do is do our job, like whatever else is going on in our life somewhere. And so but check back in, because life changes again. And, it might be, no, the most I can do is just show up and do my job properly, and I will do my part. Well, then they're doing their part, and that's not going to diminish the confidence in the team. I forget if there was a second question now.
Oh, there probably was, but I think I forgot it too. But no, I think what you just touched on something important too, is, there are times in an individual, and there are times an individual within a team is not going to be able to give 100%, right?
Yeah.
You've said this many times. Everybody comes into that team room with a story,
Yeah.
And, if there's folks that are struggling at home, other things going on, I think the key there is, as a team, how have you figured out you're going to have each other's back? Because ultimately, when you're up, somebody else is down, and when you're down, somebody else on the team should be up and be able to, hopefully, if you've built that culture, they're going to have your back.
I think you just touched on something really important that we haven't said either. And that is this doesn't all rest on the leader. And so how do your team validate each other? How do they support each other? How do they connect with each other? And are you reinforcing that and making that possible? And my favorite examples of this, a long time ago, I used to work at the Calgary Stampede. And there was a gentleman that worked in marketing, pretty sure he was in marketing, and he was late for a meeting, and he's like, oh, how am I going to start this meeting off? And on his way across, he picked up a rock from the car park, and he went into the meeting, and everybody was around the table. They were all there, and he just took this rock and he put it in front of a lady, and he said, you rock, and here's why. And then he said to her, next week, bring the rock back, and you're going to pass that on. It can't come back to me. It has to go to somebody else. And you need to tell them why you think they rock. And as I remember this, the team was predominantly, not that it really matters, but the team was predominantly female. And this rock came back with googly eyes on it and pipe cleaners and all kinds. Like it was a person now, the rock was. But the rock lived on. And I think his name was David Beck, had long retired. And you would go across to marketing and say, who's got the rock? And oh, I have. What did you get it for? Like it was just part of their culture. Wow. And it was brilliant. It was genius because he didn't have to do anything every week, but he heard what each person appreciated and saw in their team members. It's fantastic.
That is great. That is great. It's time for us to wrap up.
Oh,
yeah. This has flown past it. I know, folks, I have watched the chat just waterfall past here today, and we will try and grab some of these questions and get them out in the show notes and stuff for follow-up. But Jenny, why don't you bring us home?
Let's do that. So we'll use a slide, but I'll talk to them too. We'll pray for the power of technology here. There we go. So when we leave you every Friday, we aim to leave you with one big idea, 2 applied strategies that you could take away and put into practice straight away, and 3 questions. So the big idea is really recognizing that you need everyone on your team. And you'll notice my sub notes down there as well. Your employees are not the cogs in the wheels. They are humans. And as humans, one size does not fit all. So it's work, it's intentional. But I think when we start to look at it, we can really make progress quickly. And that means each and every person and what do they need. 2 applied strategies are quite simple this week. I'm on a campaign. I was chatting with a group this week. The high five is coming back. I believe that COVID got rid of our high five abilities. And so now the encouragement is, where are you giving a high five? High five is kind of cool because if you're actually physically with them, that touch drops oxytocin, and oxytocin makes us feel good, and our confidence will go up when we feel good. There's something in our body language there too, and it reduces stress. So high five people on your team, high five the entire team. But the other thing I really think people need to remember now is high five yourself. A self high five could even be like this, or just in the mirror, because we're struggling. Lots of people are struggling. And if we're not recognizing ourselves, we're not actually helping in that self-belief, self-esteem, and that self-confidence piece. So take the moment, give someone a high five today. And if you can't see them face to face, send them a high five. They'll smile. I promise you they will. The second one comes from John Amici, and it's known as pit time. So as a leader, especially, can you create pit time in your calendar? Pit time is purposefully interruptible time. So what that means is there is a chunk and you choose when. So if you don't go against the flow of your day, pick that time where it's easy for you to be there. If you're working face to face, make sure your team knows that they can drop in and ask you a question, come and discuss something, just even come in to connect. But you can also do this virtually. Make sure it's in your calendar, make sure people know, and say, just phone me, like turn your cameras on, just give me a call. And please don't plan anything to focus on during that time. That is your purposefully interruptible time. You can be interrupted and people can connect, and really gives you a good way to get to know your people too. And then I actually fulfilled the requirement this week. There are only 3 questions, and these were borrowed. The Performance Room is an excellent website for people looking at team performance. And so 3 really easy questions, but worth the consideration is, how would you rate your own confidence? Where are you at? And then what do you think of the confidence of each member of the team? Do you have confidence in them? How are they doing? And then how would you rate your confidence in your team as a whole? Gives you a really good starting place from where this conversation needs to go to. There you go.
Fantastic. Well, Jenny, here's a high five for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, we are back in a couple of weeks talking about psychological safety. As always, thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate all the interaction and the support, and it's fantastic to engage with you every couple of weeks. Jenny, as always, I appreciate you and everything that you bring to these conversations. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody.
See ya.